a guide used for data-driven conversations. And finally, you should also have access to the webinar survey link. As soon as the webinar is completed, you can click on the hyperlink and will be sent directly to the survey. If there are any questions in terms of technical issues that you might experience during today's presentation, please box and we will address them. Thank you.
So now, first I will introduce the Southeast Comprehensive Center. This is our early childhood team, Pamela Bonso. She's a researcher for the Southeast Comprehensive Center. I'm Kathleen Theodore. I am a senior technical assistant consultant, and I'm also the project lead for early childhood. And here is Cheryl Turner. She's a senior research associate, and she's our RMC partner. Just a little bit about the Southeast Comprehensive Center. Our region is Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. We're one of 15 regional comprehensive centers funded by the United States Department of Education, and we're charged with building the capacity of SEAs to assist districts and schools with their student achievement goals. Now I'm going to turn it over to our partner, the Mid-Atlantic Comprehensive Center. So that they can introduce their center.
And Jan, this is Chris. Are you on the phone? I don't hear Jan, so maybe I'll go ahead and introduce our center, which is a parallel to the Southeast, only we serve the Mid-Atlantic states. I'm Chris Dwyer, and I'm the early learning lead from the MACC at WestEd, and we'll show you our states in the next, with the next slide. And Kat, I think you've given me that. Excellent. So we serve the Mid-Atlantic, Delaware, the District of Columbia, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And today's webinar is based on some work that we did for the state of Pennsylvania. We did last summer a series of presentations and workshops at Pennsylvania's Governors Institutes to engage teams, preschool and K-3 teams in using data. And of course, in those sessions we had hands-on activities and we had the luxury of more time. So we've pulled some of the key ideas that resonated with people in those teams and have incorporated them in this webinar. I think we thank the state of Pennsylvania for getting us started in this arena, and we've also done a little of the same work in Maryland. So in our own region, we've been able to do things in person, but we're glad that all of you have joined us today to get a sense of what we've done with those states, and we'll give you the highlights. So looks like I do have control of the slide, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. Kat, I don't seem to be able to make these move. There we go. So the objectives for today, this is going to be fairly fast-paced. We're going to share concepts about using data and 5 key principles. We hope with those 5 principles that this will give some of you ideas for maybe refining some of your current practice. If the work is new to you, maybe it will give you an idea of where to start. And the third objective, we've incorporated some of the practical strategies and tools for each of the principles. We'll try to give you a little bit of taste of the through interaction. You'll have to be quick and typing into the chat when we open up some opportunities to interact. But we wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of what the data use workshops were like. We'll start with a definition. And our focus is very much based on a reflection, conversation, action approach to database decision making. There's a definition that I've pulled apart a little to emphasize some pieces. We're emphasizing joint working, joint perspectives, joint interpretation. So it's teachers and administrators interpreting together the information, whether it's center-based, pre-K teachers, K-3 teachers, principals, center directors. The word systematically is important there, following protocols and routines to begin systematically using different types of data. The word I've emphasized there is analyzing, because the power of this work is in analyzing the data together. And that's the part that we heard from people as we did these sessions in Pennsylvania was new to them, that they were more used to being handed data summaries, and they found that much less useful. So we're going to be going through some strategies for how to work together on analyzing the various types of data. We'll start with a few considerations before we get into the principles. And I'll start with this slide, which is this huge promise that those of us in education have been hearing about data use, which you can look at the list of bullets, and you've probably heard many of those promises yourself, but at base, it's all about what's in that blue box. And that's using data to influence adult behaviors, whether that's getting teachers to try new practices or reallocating resources, maybe to coaching or seeking particular types of professional development. These promises are all about changing adult behaviors, which means, and I want you to think about this as we go through there, the implication that the source of the data and the types of data that are used then have to have credibility with the adults whose behaviors we're trying to change. Now, those promises may seem daunting, and I've certainly felt that they've been daunting to a lot of people, and almost maybe daunting enough to have people not know where to start. And so we like to talk about realistic expectations, urging people to begin by thinking about using data to improve daily practice. And the examples I'm going to give you are more in that vein. The reflection and conversation involved in jointly reviewing the data helps you to do some of those things that are listed in the bullet. Reflecting on your own practice, checking assumptions that maybe you're making while you're getting others' views. It's all about what's in the yellow box, making practice public. Using data encourages us to make practice public, which is this real fulcrum for improvement. And that's one of the reasons why you'll see a principle that we have a little bit later about encouraging administrators and teacher leaders to lead some of these data conversations, because action is what we have in mind here, making practice public and thinking through what kinds of changes we want to make and evaluate. So if you've been listening to me so far, and if in your mind data has been only translated as formal assessments, then we want to pause here and consider that when we're talking about data, we're talking about all kinds of information. And this slide just starts to glimpse at what we might be including here. Certainly, a lot of our information will be in the category of learning and development. If you scan down that list, though, I want you to make sure you're seeing that we're talking about informal check-ins and observations, as well as looking at student work and student performance. We're not only talking about high-stakes assessments. We're also talking about the kind of information that might be better classified as behavioral, attendance, health information, participation, engagement. And we're talking about children's background, the conditions for learning, their family language and the level of education in the family opportunities. And then up in the purple box, we're certainly also talking about the teaching environment and what we know about teacher quality in the classroom environment. So all kinds of data might fit into this category of data utilization. Another consideration that will float into our principles are the different roles that individual educators have in data use. The motivation to use data is going to depend on the role. For example, if you've had a hand in selecting a measure, then you're probably going to have a greater investment in using the results. Everyone has a role in contributing ideas and taking action, but then there are particular roles that individuals might have in the data use process. That's important because the perspective on use will vary by your role. I've certainly observed over time that the level of interest in data, specific kinds of data, varies by role. So a classroom teacher is likely to be very interested in data about individual children and their performance, whereas someone at the state agency level or someone in the district office will be most interested and will gravitate toward aggregate data, summary data, to look at trends over time or trends over an entire district. The power is when we bring those points of view together so that we're converging in our understandings of both specific and aggregate, how a change at one level might influence the learning opportunities for a child in the classroom. To really make meaningful comparisons, we need to know the aggregate data, but to be able to understand the actions, we also have to know what this means specifically. So in our reflection, conversation, action mode, we want to make sure those perspectives come together. So with those considerations in mind, let's look at these 5 principles. 5 principles that support a culture of data utilization. And these have both some research and theory behind the principles. The first one is going to lead us to develop inquiries or evaluation questions. We use the word evaluate here because we want to have data use, we want to see data use in results that we value. Remember, this is going to be about changing adults' behavior, so we want to make sure that we value this information. And what's the challenge here? Challenge is in that very first principle on the top. And this one is pretty well established, that data are more likely to be used if they inform current practice and policy, not when the focus is primarily compliance. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that we all live in an era where we have, and probably most of you, do a lot of required data collection for compliance. And that actually may depress interest in using the data to inform current practice. So you may be in the situation where you've collected a great deal of data, you've reported that data, but you haven't really used that data. And if we look at that principle, that almost seems like a pretty natural thing to happen. So what's the strategy here? Well, the strategy is to identify questions of interest, not to start with the data, but to start with questions of interest or important problems of practice or a lever of change, to develop a hypothesis, to develop an evaluation question, to frame an authentic question, an authentic puzzlement that you don't already know the answer to, and that the answer to which may shape a course of action. By a question of interest, we might we'll give you lots of examples. It might be a question of which children need additional interventions, or have the interventions paid off for us. An important problem of practice may be a different way into it. If you have children who have limited vocabularies, the problem of practice is how you're going to build those experiences to build vocabulary. A lever of change may be are we getting adequate practice in order to ensure mastery of key points. So whether you start with questions or problems, you're really building a prediction or a hypothesis. I like to start with questions because I think it's easy to bring most people into the discussion when you do that. So, for example, some of the common kinds of questions when we did these activities that emerged from our groups in Pennsylvania were questions like, how well have children been prepared for kindergarten? Or where should we focus professional development? Now, one thing to notice is that questions are going to vary by role and perspective. The same thing is true of parents. We had a question sent in ahead of time about any tips for sharing data with parents, and I would say that the first tip is that it begins with understanding what are parents' high priority questions. What's a parent want to know? Of course, we know a parent's going to want to know something that's fairly specific about their own child, but they may also want to have a question about the aggregate part. How does that compare within context? So beginning not with the data again, but with what the question is that will be coming from the source. So let's do a practice, and we have a poll. If you think of this role question, look at those 4 questions. Which question might be the highest priority for teachers if we think of our different role groups? And I think Kat will put on a poll. You'll see the 4 questions.
There's the poll. Thank you.
So which of those questions do you think might be the highest priority for a teacher? And click in that little circle.
Okay, we still have a few more people voting. Okay, I think that's good. I'll close the poll.
Well, let's see what they said. Which children need additional interventions? Yes, that's what I think might be a high priority, but I certainly also understand why many of you selected how well have children been prepared for kindergarten, because if you are a pre-K teacher, that might be your top question. Which children need additional interventions is the kind of question that we frequently use data for. Let's look at the next slide. Kat, do you need to give it back to me?
Yes. Okay, you should have it. Do you have it, Chris? Okay.
I do. So the coming up with high priority questions is something of an art, and it's I learned from doing this both as an evaluator and in working with folks through workshops that there are a couple of strategies to get people started on doing this. Remember, principle at the top, the most useful questions are going to anticipate the need for changes in policy and practice. An authentic question is pointed to action. So one way to help people start is to think of what are these generic forms of questions that count. This comes from an article that was in Education Leadership about what are some generic ways of beginning to think about high priority questions. And you can see they're questions about progress, they're questions about gaps, they're questions about trends over time. They're big questions. What I like to do is connect those big questions with then components of programs, parental engagement, language and literacy, and have teams of people begin thinking about a component and the large question. So in parent engagement, where are we having success? What are the kinds of things that parents are responding to? Where are our gaps? What kinds of things have changed over time? So that's a way into the conversation for those of you who might need to begin where the high priority question isn't automatically obvious to you and you need to begin stimulating that thinking. Okay. Once you've got a high priority question like the one that I've put at the top, how well is our new kindergarten math curriculum preparing students? The next step, which sometimes isn't obvious to people, is that you need to begin developing the sub-questions. What are all the things I would need to know in order to build up a robust response to that larger question? And I think this is perhaps for those of you who have done program evaluation, you know that this is the critical stage of, it isn't just that large question. I really begin to understand what I need to know when I start saying, what are the different kinds of things I need to know? So here are just a few examples of what the sub-questions might be in this case. You know, what's happened with that end of year kindergarten math assessment? Where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses? What are the misconceptions that students who are struggling have? Question number 3 would be interesting. What are the teachers doing to supplement the curriculum? That might be telling me something about where the gaps are in that curriculum. Question number 5, what are first grade teachers' perceptions of math preparation, and where are they providing extra support? So breaking that high priority question down into further questions that are going to help me develop a really robust understanding of building up to my high priority question. Now, here's the most challenging thing I'm going to ask you to do, and that is to think about a sub-question yourself, and we'll have to be quick with this. You'll have to type in the chat, so get ready to do that. For this high priority question, to what extent are teachers using instructional strategies that are research-based and developmentally appropriate? You don't have to think yet about what data you'd have, but what would be another question you might need to know in order to be able to answer that? So I'd love to see if we can get a couple of people typing some examples into the chat. Give you a little second. I don't see anything yet.
I want to tell everyone to type their questions in the chat box under chat where it says type message here. You click the drop, you're under chat.
Right, and be sure you send them to all of us if you've got an idea of. So what would be a sub-question you'd have to answer in order to get at that larger question?
Chris, we have a few coming in.
Okay.
First one is, what are teachers' core instructional strategies?
Okay. That would certainly be one. I'd have to have that basically.
Mm-hmm. Another one is, what research do teachers cite as influential?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got one more. What do teachers think are the most effective instructional strategies?
Okay, so those are examples of the kinds of things that you'd start to break that down with. And let me show you what you do next, and you'll get a sense of a few of the questions, sub-questions that I thought of for that one. In the second column are a few of the sub-questions that I started to pull through. But what's really important about this chart is the third column, which is to begin thinking now, well, what data do we already have that might help me to answer that question? And, you know, hold yourself back from going first to the fourth column, which is what new information do I need? Because very likely you've got some data on hand that will help you answer those sub-questions. That's how you build up, and that's how you begin to take advantage of the data that you may already have in hand to answer the sub-questions. Okay, so that was our first principle, which might have surprised you, but it really comes from that notion that it's going to be much more fruitful to start with a question, a hypothesis, rather than simply starting with data. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions in the chat. I think, Cheryl, that you might be monitoring.
Right now, I think we're we don't have any at this time, but I'll keep monitoring for more.
Okay, then I'm going to go on to the second principle, which is going to be in the area of leadership. And the principle is that data is going to be much more likely to be used if the leader, the building leader, the center director, is taking an essential role in promoting the use of data and engaging staff in the dialogue about data. Visible roles, and you can see identified there are three high priority roles: using data to identify gaps in instruction, using data to allocate resources, and using data to set professional development priorities. Leaders can promote and support a culture of data. Whoops, let me go back. There we go. Some of the important functions that leaders have are building the relationships across the system for data sharing, because as we've already seen in questions, some of the most important questions require information from others. Pre-K folks need to have data from K3, vice versa. Another important function is to try to establish some commonality of some measures, not all measures, but some consistent ways of reporting and organizing information to facilitate comparison. And then the third bullet, an important function of leaders, is to bring other people into the leadership role, teacher leaders, coaches, so that we're sharing in framing inquiries, we're sharing in leading the conversations around data. You know, those would be true at all levels, but in early learning, it's especially critical to develop relationships across the PK to grade 3 continuum. While we were doing this work in Pennsylvania, we worked with a central office administrator who had done a great deal to take initiative in reaching out to the various pre-K centers and providers in the community and engage them in discussions with the kindergarten teachers so that they together could look at kindergarten entry data. Doing this over a couple years led to some wonderful collaborations within that district. The joint professional development, where now this is a district that did not have public pre-K, so we're talking about Head Start, community-based providers, but with the school district reaching out and encouraging them to participate in professional development. Over time, it became clear that some of those centers didn't have the resources to purchase their own assessments, so the school district did that for them. It led to some very productive partnerships shared basically around data. it's a little tricky, as many of you know, to figure out, well, whose role is it to reach across that continuum and begin those conversations. I always encourage school principals to do that, but that bridge can be bridged by a data conversation. I talked recently with principals in New York State about their roles in early learning, and we were looking at a variety of functions, a variety of roles that elementary principals can take in their leadership of the school, and these are captured in the boxes there. And when you glance through those, you see that really all of them could be made more powerful by incorporating information, by incorporating data about student outcomes, about professional development, about teacher practices. So that's the second, leadership. The third principle is about building infrastructure. And the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about here to build a data culture is related to staff support and the types of staff supports that staff members need to be encouraged to use data. I put in the block on the right-hand side some of the familiar types of support that have been proven useful. Data coach is somebody who has a particular role in coaching the use of data. Organizing teams, whether they're cross grade or all folks at the same level, to review data during a dedicated time. Time is really a key factor here. Protocols and routines. We'll look at a protocol in just a second. And then obviously professional development, professional learning communities built around data use. So some of those structures, some of that infrastructure is really important to be thinking about if we want to incentivize people to use data. Here's an example from a school that we visited on when we were filming practices of schools that had made great strides in mathematics. This school was in Spokane, an elementary school. We, in this case, filmed a number of practices in the school, but one of the helpful practices, and people always have enjoyed this film, is the weekly review of student work. An example of a protocol use, routine time, weekly schedule with each grade level team. These happen to be the first grade teachers and teacher assistants and the math coach, where a regular protocol was used to look at student work in mathematics each week and have a structured discussion. The protocol that they used is pretty straightforward, but they followed it every week. So they would introduce what the particular problem was. They'd look at the work of 4 students in 1 hour, begin with a work sample, and discuss from the work sample what math content they could believe the student understood. Number 3, they would then also discuss what seemed to be missing or what misconceptions the student might have. And then 4th, they would identify the strategies to use. And we would do this in 3 rounds so that when they got to the final, they would have talked about 4 students' work on a particular problem using the worksheet that you see at the right just as a way to take their notes. And that would then lead to a 10-minute discussion at the end about what commonalities they saw across misconceptions and what they might need to do in curriculum to be able to strengthen students' understanding. So, you know, there's a simple example that shows a number of the things about good practice, led by a principal, sometimes led by the coach, a dedicated time, engaged everyone. Some of the real insights here came from the teacher assistants who were working one-on-one with students, and this very simple protocol that became very routine. So the kind of infrastructure that can be simple but helpful to people. And again, I'll pause there to see if there are any questions. So let me go on to the fourth principle, which is about taking an inventory and organizing the way we're already collecting information as the starter. The slides are a little bulky sometimes to move them. And here's the principle, and that's to establish routines. A lot about data use and the data culture is establishing routines. And here's a beginning place, creating an inventory of existing data that's being collected and a schedule of data review. This worksheet comes from our friend Diana Nunnally from Using Data Solutions, who worked with us in Pennsylvania. And it's a format for beginning to organize on a basis by, you can see that its frequency is the driver here. What data do we collect and on what basis? And if you look at the row that is the second row, monthly, attendance data in this case is collected monthly. Teachers in this case collect it. It's analyzed with the center director and the teachers together the last week of each month. And then importantly, where do we analyze it? And this is again part of this conversation. Well, it occurs during a team meeting. And then when do we share it more broadly? During a quarterly update. So you can see that what we've tried to do here is to make sure that data isn't just being collected and reported or kept in a file, but there's a specific routine for not only when is it collected, but when is it analyzed and when is it shared more broadly in order to interpret in order to interpret potential actions coming from that data. So if you were to do this, what you would probably discover pretty quickly is that data is being collected that isn't being analyzed and isn't being used. And that's something that one of the real values of such an audit, because you may be spending time with collecting information that no one really has a particular use for. And so I want you to think about that. And this is a chance, we don't have your name, so it doesn't have to be confessional here. Are you collecting any type of data that you're not using? Be interested to see in the chat if you've got any examples of something you're collecting but not using.
Hi, Chris. We're starting to get some in. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, if you would put them in the chat box instead of the question box, that'd be helpful. But for this particular slide, we've got some. We have running records. Let's see, we also have student work samples. And then we have weekly observation notes with children's behavior.
Those are interesting because I would say those are all examples of, I can think as a teacher of data that I collected on young children and probably stored in a portfolio, but maybe never made specific use of from terms of thinking about group instruction or patterns of instruction. So the inventory, another way to think about an inventory, and this also comes from Diana Nunnally, a way to visualize it, which I think is helpful, is what she calls the data pyramid, that we're collecting data. If you look at the bottom level, we're collecting data all the time on a continuous basis on student understanding. It's very targeted information, and it has a purpose at the time during instruction that we probably almost instinctively take advantage of. At the top of the pyramid, we may only be doing a formal assessment once a year or twice a year, and that is going to be give us the broadest view of progress. It's really some of those other types of data collection in between that we might need to give some more thought to in terms of our use, the frequency of how we're going to think about using and analyzing and sharing that information, and in those cases whether we're missing some of those steps that we could be taking advantage of, or whether we are we have data that doesn't really fit into our pyramid and that we're collecting but not really using in any particular way. So now I'm going to go on to the fifth principle, which is about dialogue, and this is where it comes together: reflection, conversation, and action coming together to make the data use meaningful. And the principle here is about establishing consistent protocols for reviewing and discussing data. We're going to share there are various ways to do this. There are different protocols. This is, I think, a fairly straightforward set of steps. It's one we used in workshops with early childhood teachers and with leaders and principals. They liked this process. They liked particularly step 2, which I'll give you a little flavor for. There are 4 steps, and we'll go through them with practice. If you didn't download the handout ahead of time, this is a full handout because we're not going to go through all those questions, but if you want to try out this protocol, I'd encourage you to download the handout so that you have guidance for using this. It does need facilitation because it's easy for teams of people to get stuck at a phase or skip a phase or spend too long at one phase and not move on to the others. But there are 4 steps where first we predict what the data is going to say, we generate our hypotheses. Second, we develop a visualization. We work with the data to develop a visual picture of what we think the data is telling us. Third, we observe what we see. And finally, fourth, we make inferences. So what we find is that people have really enjoyed phase 2 because that's something that they often haven't done before. They haven't taken the time to work directly with the data and try to present it to each other to sort of look at what they think it says. And then sometimes they have skipped phase 3, which is to, in a disciplined way, not jump to conclusions, but to say, what do we see? What patterns do we see? What seems to be true? And then finally, phase 4, inferring. So what I've done is organize a few slides to take us through an example to learn a little bit more about each of these steps, each of these phases. And let's take a look at that. And this would be, if we were together in a workshop, we'd probably take an hour or 2 to work through some examples. This is going to be very short dialogue practice. So here's our high priority question. Are students enrolled in the district pre-K program being well prepared in social emotional skills? In other words, are they ready for kindergarten in the social emotional domain? And we've got to assume for this that we've got some data, and that new data that we have are assessments of social emotional skill readiness that are collected early in kindergarten. And that was the other handout that we sent to you ahead of time, just to sort of give you a flavor for what that could look like. These happen to be from Pennsylvania's kindergarten inventory, and those are 4 indicators that kindergarten teachers use to assess students' readiness: emotional regulation, self-awareness, conflict resolution, and behavior regulation. So in our practice dialogue here, we see that step number 1 was to predict. And the question, you see the high priority question there, I've got to give you a little bit more data or you couldn't predict anything. Half the children in this district are enrolled in the public pre-K program, the district's pre-K program. And many of those children are those children who have multiple risk factors coming in. The other children, the other half who come into kindergarten, have been in other kinds of pre-K. Some obviously have had no pre-K, some have been in home-based care, some have been in a community center. And so one of the first things you'd do would be to say with your team, well, what do we think we're going to see in that social emotional kindergarten data? What might we see? You're not jumping to conclusions, you're really generating hypotheses. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just suggest, what might be a prediction. A prediction could be, well, students with more risk factors will be less prepared, right? Some people might say the children in home-based care might not fare as well as others. They might be thinking there that they didn't have as much experience around other children their same age. So there might be predictions of that type that help get you ready for the second step. And the second step is to explore the data. So if we were together in a workshop, what I would do would be to give you data from individual children in how well they scored on that kindergarten entry assessment. And in teams, you'd be looking at that data, you'd be looking at their prior pre-K experience, you'd be looking at their risk factors, you'd be looking at what kind of supports and interventions they get. You might ask for other assessment data, so you might want to know how well they did in their kindergarten entry language assessment. So you'd have a variety of data to work with, and you'd begin to work in teams to visualize what you're learning. And I'm going to show you, because we obviously can't do that here, I'm going to show you some examples of when I've done this with people, what they've started to come up with, and what kinds of, when they start looking at the data, here's what one team did. Of course, I've neatened this up because we were just doing this on large chart paper. They wanted to look first at risk factors. And so they sorted the data and made a table to look at students who had 1 or 2 risk, 0 or 1 risk factors, or 2 or more risk factors. And then they sorted the students by their experience prior to kindergarten. I've circled that row there to just highlight that there were 60 students who had been in the district pre-K, and 15 of them had fewer than 2 risk factors, 45 more. Then this team took those numbers and they changed them into percentages, and they made a pie chart. So you see they were beginning to, this didn't obviously tell them the answer to the question, but this is how one visualization that was helping them to begin thinking about the data. Another team began to work with the indicators, and this handout that I sent you before is helpful in seeing what they did. They began to group the indicators. The students who typically scored at a higher level, a 3 or a 4, grouped together, and the students who had scored at the not yet evident or emerging lower level on the different indicators, and they started to sort out students by their preparation as well. In their case, they made a bar graph by combining the data and began to look at the practical, began to look at the experiences that students had had. So this is a flavor for the kinds of visualizations that people would develop. It's hard. It's hard work, and it's hard work to do it in a group. It takes a lot of conversation, and it takes some real time. As people are translating the individual data into summary data, though, they're getting the ideas for this third step and beginning to develop their own sense of what's actually happening with information. So the third step is descriptive. It's really to say, what are we seeing in the data? What's popping out? What are the relationships that we're seeing? What are the patterns? It's not to jump to conclusions, what we should immediately do or what we immediately know, partly because the numbers are going to be often quite small, and so we're working with very small numbers, but we're getting insights that are combining the aggregate information with the information about individual children. And of course, the folks who are doing this are the teachers of those individual children, so they're bringing more to the table. I'm going to skip the next slide, watching time. What we would do, of course, would be to work together to figure out what we think is what some of the trends might be, what might be happening. The fourth step is when we infer whether there are any tentative conclusions, and probably that the next bullet is the most important. What else do we need to know? Because in many cases, these data dialogues really lead us to say, well, we need to know more about, perhaps in this case, we need to know more about some individual children's experiences prior to kindergarten, or we need to know more about what we've already been trying to do with students and how they've been responding. Other questions the data leads to. So that protocol, that data dialogue protocol with the 4 steps, if you haven't tried something like that, I'd encourage you to try something systematic and give yourself a good time to do that. Don't overwhelm yourself with data at the beginning, but learn to use the protocol together by exploring something fairly straightforward. So those are the 5 principles that we have found are pretty fundamental to begin building this active culture of data utilization. Framing questions or building hypotheses, making sure that the leader has an active role in leading the discussion, taking into account that infrastructure, whether it's time or protocol or data coaching, making an inventory of what you already collect, when you analyze it, and then using a protocol for a data dialogue. And Kat, I think I'll turn that back over to you then.
Please join me in thanking Chris Dwyer for such a rich presentation on data. Chris, also, I did see a question asking about the slide presentation, about whether they could have a slide, so I'll leave that up to you. Okay, yes. So we'll send that, we'll email that to everyone. We also want to let you know we did not have time at the end for questions, so if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to us, as we can email those back to you. So thank you for joining the webinar. Here's Chris Dwyer's contact, also the Mid-Atlantic Comprehensive Center at Westhead contact numbers, as well as the Southeast Comprehensive Center's contact numbers. You will see this on the slide when we email it to you. Also, there is an evaluation that will be going out to you. It's also in the handout. Please fill out the evaluation. We need your feedback. If you have a QR scanner, you are app on your iPhone or a smartphone, you're welcome to scan the information right now, and it'll go straight to your phone. If SurveyMonkey will open straight on your phone. If there are not any other comments from any of our panelists or our presenter, we will end there. Thank you so much. And one other thing, an archive link with the recording will also be sent out. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day. Bye.